Good morning, students. This is your last science fair podcast of the year, if you can believe it. We are nearing the end of our science fair time, so I want to go over some important due dates, some trends that I saw after I read your introductions and methods, and the science fair itself. So if I click on the science fair, again, you've always had access to this page. These are the due dates. I actually added something right here, your paper due date. Now, if you notice, it's a little different than what you've been told. So we've been going by the due date of January 11th, that's this Friday, as the due date for your papers. After reading your intros and methods, I wanted to give you the weekend to finalize anything and to make any more edits. And I hope that extra time will be beneficial for you. So I'm not going to collect these actually until Monday the 14th, and that is the final due date. I have to have those papers on that date because our science fair itself, when you create your trifold boards, is the next day, the 15th, and we'll talk about those two things separately throughout the podcast. Right now, I want to focus just on the paper. But if you scroll down, you can see under second quarter assignments, we have some science fair board information, some stats help, but more importantly, the science fair page. So I'll click here first and go over the paper. And again, I did change the due date to Monday the 14th. And this is really in response to what you turned in prior to the break. I just felt you needed a little more time to make some corrections, add some information to your intro and method section. So hopefully that helps. One thing I want to point out is, please, if you have not read the directions and the formatting directions, please do so. I can't tell you how many papers I saw that just had the wrong format. The papers were single spaced. They were in the wrong font. Please follow the correct format. You will get marked off heavily if you do not use the right format. Okay, please read through those. All right, papers should be double spaced, not single spaced. They should be in one of these fonts right here. Okay, so please check your format. Okay, if you have any questions, if you'd like to speak with me about this, that's fine. I also want to highlight about the tense. So the beginning of your paper, it's really up to you how you decide to write it, past tense or present tense. But what we want to avoid is future tense. So many of you, when you were writing about your method section, you were writing it as, I will do these procedures. You've already done the experiment, so you don't need to say, this is what we will be doing. It's really about, this is what we did. Okay? So really check your tense. Now, the results section, of course, should be written in past tense as well. So please abide by that. The other common mistake are your in-text citations. Okay. And I'm not so sure. I saw maybe one or two papers in the whole academy that actually had this correct. In-text citations are citations about the facts that you, or the research that you have done. So your job in the introduction is to simply write about and explain the background information, the research that is there, the background information that a reader must know in order to understand what it is that you are doing with your project, right? The reader is not an expert in your field. You've got to teach the reader what it is that's important and what it is they have to know and understand to sort of get your project. Okay, that's your goal. And you have to keep in mind that that information isn't coming from you. It's coming from the research that you did, the articles that you did, right? The searches that you did on Google. It comes from other sources, and you have to cite them appropriately in the text. Otherwise, it's really either your opinion, which no one really is interested in, or it's plagiarism. Either way, you have to fix that. So let me go through a couple of examples of what I mean by that, because this was a really big issue with your papers. And I'd hate for your papers or hate for you to lose a ton of points on this paper on something so basic. All right, so I'm going to scroll down here and let me open up this guy right here. So here's a sample lab report. You have access to this. And in the introduction, you will see that these are in-text citations, right? These are citations based on this information, okay? So the optimal foraging theory assumes that animals feed in a way that maximizes their net rate of energy intake per unit. Now, that might be common knowledge for this researcher, but this researcher is not the owner of this knowledge. They didn't create this information, and therefore they have to cite where this information came from. Okay, so they cited it appropriately with the authors and the year of the research. Okay, I encourage you, please look at these examples. Let me show you another example. Oh, not this one. I want to look at this technical paper. So if we scroll down to the introduction, the first sentence here, excess bacteria in waterways is a global issue that directly impacts human health. So that might be common knowledge for many of us because we've studied science. But again, we are not the owners of this information. We understand this information to be true because we read it somewhere or we heard it somewhere. And if we're not the creators of this knowledge, then you have to cite it. Okay? And it's cited right here, author, comma, year. Simpson did research to indicate this information, right? Whoever wrote this paper, they were able to emphatically say or write about this sentence based on the research that they read. And again, it is estimated that in 2010, 1.8 billion people around the world used water that was at some point deemed unsafe for drinking. Again, we could probably come up with this information ourselves, minus the 1.8 billion, but we could probably say with certain truth that there were people that use unsafe water. Okay, you've read about it, we've talked about it in class, and you could say that. However, when you write it in a paper, you cannot say it without citing the source because you are not the owner of this knowledge, of this statement. So you have to cite it. And if you continue to scroll down here, just about every sentence in this introduction is cited because the point of the introduction, again, is to inform the reader what it is that they need to know in order to understand what it is that you are doing. All the background information that exists, all the research that exists, and why they're doing this project. If you can't do that effectively in the introduction, then it's going to be really hard for the reader to follow what it is that you're doing. So if you look at this example, and this is the VGS technical paper, we'll talk about that later on, but you'll see almost every sentence is cited here. That's okay, because none of this information was really made up by the writer. They're able to say these or write these sentences because they found the information somewhere else. So please look, I think right here we're going on 6 or 7 straight sentences that have been cited. They're really well-written sentences, but they cite it because that knowledge is not theirs. They're not the owner. They didn't create this knowledge. It was someone else who did research for this information. So again, please check your introductions. I think there was only a couple of people in STEM that actually got this right. You must cite your sentences. Okay, if you have questions, if you want me to check it, please let me know, because we don't want to get into a case here where you unintentionally plagiarize, which is what I saw in a lot of your introductions. I don't think you meant to plagiarize, but you did. So please cite where you got the sources. You all have 5 references. That's what we did in the research plan. This is the place to actually use those references to write your introduction. Okay, please come see me if you need help with this. Come see your teachers if you need help with this. But these are really good examples of what it is that we're asking when we say write an introduction and use in-text citations to cite the background information. Okay. The next thing I want to go over, I'm going to look at the template here. So I encourage you all, please use this template. There are several of you who didn't even use the template. So that's the other formatting announcement I'd like to make is use the template. Okay, in the methods section, it clearly says, all right, we want to write paragraph form. It says it in the directions. I can't tell you how many papers that I saw that actually just listed materials and procedures. Clearly, you didn't read the directions. Please follow the directions. It needs to be in paragraph form. This is a formal paper. We're not writing lists. We're writing paragraphs. So just go back and fix that, okay? I'd hate for you to miss out on all these points because you didn't follow formatting, right? Lastly, what you're expected to do between now and Monday is, number one, make corrections and look at the comments that I posted on Canvas. And two, you need to start with the results, with the conclusions, with the data analysis. I'm going to come back to the abstract because really you should be writing your abstracts last. We'll focus on that later. But if you scroll down here, the results section, this is simply to state what results did you get. You're not making any guesses of what the results mean. You're just simply, here is the data. Here is what I got based on my procedures, okay? Includes only data collected during the investigation and experimentation. It's a summary of the data only. That is it. We're not interested about what that could lead to. That's for the next section, right? You're just simply writing out, if I have this chart right here, you are simply just writing out in words what this chart means, okay? Some people, when you have a reader, the reader doesn't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what this chart means. The reader wants to be told what the chart means. That's your job as a writer to tell them what this chart means. And it's very simple. As seen in Table 1, the greater the frequency of bleeps emitted, the greater the mean number of echoes recorded. However, the percentage of echoes per bleep reduces substantially as the number of bleeps increases, okay? It's a simple summary of the data. It doesn't mean what that indicates. It's just a summary of the data. What we do want to avoid, and you will get marked off for this, we want to avoid the words significant and we want to avoid the words correlation. Because unless you have calculated p-values, you cannot say that something is significant or insignificant. That is a statistical calculation that you can make, and we want to be as accurate with our description as possible. Please don't use the word significant. You can say there is a difference, but you cannot say there's a significant difference. Same thing with correlation. Numbers might look similar, or you might see a pattern, but we want to avoid the word correlation unless you've calculated the R value, okay? And if you would like to do that, come see me. But again, the data section is just simply, here's my data, this is what it says. Not really interpreting the connections. Here's some box and whisker plots there. You see, here are some examples. But that is for your results section. I have a template that I can show you here in a minute. For your discussion and conclusions section, it's one section, contains an interpretation. This is where you interpret. This is the section where you actually can support or not support a hypothesis. And I use the words carefully: support, not support a hypothesis. You are not proving anything. Your data did not prove anything. All you did was do an experiment to support or not support a hypothesis. Okay, so please use that information. Okay, so here's where you talk about the trends in the data. What are the patterns that you see? And what does that tell you about the data? Okay, you can also use a comparison from other research that you found in the past. Does this support research that has been done? That's why you did the background research. You can talk about that. Okay, and then of course you have this last sentence: we're never proving, we're accepting or rejecting, or support, not support, same kind of concept there. And then the last, your literature citations. But once you get to the results in the discussion and conclusion section, then you can go back and write your abstract right here. Your abstract is just a concise summary, one paragraph, one page, double spaced. You don't need to use citations here. It's just a brief summary of this is what I did, these were my basic results, and these were what the results mean. So you can do all that very quickly. Here's an example, one paragraph. If you read through this particular paper, a little bit, one sentence on the background, one sentence on the purpose, one or two sentences about what they did, one or two sentences on what the results mean, and then, or what the results are, and then one sentence at the very end of this suggests that there is unknown or dark matter. So another example of what you can look at. But this is a really well-written abstract. If you would like to, and it's up on Canvas. If we look on Canvas, sample papers, you have access to all these sample papers that I just said. Okay, excuse me. The last thing that I'd like to show you is, let me get back to Canvas, data analysis. For many of you, you might not be sure how to analyze the data. I have an analyzing checklist. I have some podcasts. I'll look at these conclusion sections in a second, but the data analysis. So here I posted this. If you're not sure how to do a box and whisker plot and put that on your paper, here you go. These are the directions. I've actually made a podcast if you'd like to watch the podcast to walk through, and then how to interpret the data. Okay, this is the information. Here are some reminders. Please read through this for your paper. I've also given you some summaries of what to write. Okay, here are some sample summaries of once you have done the box and whisker, here is how you'd write an analysis. Okay, use that as a template. If you are finding p-values, here is an example of how to write a summary for p-values. If you're not sure, if you'd like to try this type of a test of significance, come see me. I can show you how to do it. But these are all the ways of writing different types of data analyses, right? The results section of your paper, right? Oh, lastly, I know on the paper itself, let me click to the paper real quick. So on the paper itself, you have this discussion. It's kind of vague right here, the discussion and conclusion. So I would make sure that I follow this exactly. And if you need, here are some ways to write discussion and conclusions. Here are some templates that you could use. I've given you different paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, 4. That's a template. And again, you're making some inferences here based on your observations through the data. So here's another template that you could use. All you have to do is fill in the blanks and make it in paragraph form, and just double check to make sure that you have everything in that paragraph based on the, our science fair template paper. Okay, so that is there for you. Discussion and conclusion template. If you need a place to start, you can start here. Okay. Lastly, and again, I go back to before I talk about the science fair itself, please ask your teachers for help if you're not sure. And please understand that this due date is Monday, the 14th of January. Paper copy turned into Mr. Matthews, 1 copy per group. There is no late work. You must turn it in or you will have a 0. Okay? Please get that taken care of. Now, the science fair itself, you're required to, and you'll get a little more information as we go throughout the week, but you're going to have to present. Presentations are, or let me back up. You will be coming up with a trifold board, and if you scroll down here, I've given you some information. Science fair board template. So here is a typical kind of generic form of how you could set up your project. Here's the link there. It doesn't have to be like this, but you certainly could. And what you are doing is really taking sections of your paper and printing them out and putting them on a board. But if you want to arrange it a little differently, that's fine. This is the place also to put the pictures that you took. Okay, good idea to put pictures so the reader and the judge has an idea of what it is that you did. So here's kind of an example. Here is the, let's see if it's going to work. Here is the rubric. Okay. And when you give your presentation, it's going to be a 3 to 5 minute presentation with questions. So you'll have to also not only create a board, but practice your presentation. Okay? We're going to be doing that later on this week. And that happens on the 15th. I have science fair boards for you for $5 a piece. If you don't want to go to the store and buy one, you can buy one from the school. All right, I'm responsible for selling those. Lastly, if you need some stats help, and I'm kind of backing up a little bit, I created a stats help page with just some podcasts on how to walk you through some of the data collection piece. And here's how to make graphs and charts in Google. If you're not sure, you can certainly watch this podcast. It's about 8 minutes long about how to create things in Google to add to your paper, which obviously you can use for your board. But other than that, please come see me if you have any questions, or any of your teachers. I know we're all here to help you, but it's really important that in the STEMX time that you are working on the science fair. There is no more time to do science fair after this week. Right? It's go time now. Monday, the paper is due, paper copy. Tuesday, you will need to have your trifold boards for the actual science fair itself.